Going to be introducing, we're going to be doing kind of a Academy Award style format here. I'm going to introduce the gentleman who's going to introduce our panel, and really looking forward to emceeing that discussion and hearing what a handful of dairy farmers have to say about their preparations for the next 10 years. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce and welcome our panelists up to the stage, but as they come up as well, going to be introducing Dan Kaufman of Greenstone to introduce our panelists. Dan?
On behalf of Greenstone Farm Credit Services, it's my pleasure today to introduce our first presentation of the morning. The panel presentation, Dairy's Next 10 Years, What Does the Future Hold? Our moderator is Spencer Chase, Managing Editor of AgriPulse, and the panelists are Christina Zeiderveen, Managing Partner of Black Soil Dairy, Hope Dairy, and Dakota Plains Dairy. They milk 2,700 cows at the home farm in Iowa, as well as work with Christina's brother in South Dakota. At all three milking locations combined, they milk 15,000 cows. Lee Kinnard owns and operates Kinnard Farms, a family-owned dairy and crop farm located 25 miles northeast of Green Bay, Wisconsin. Under Lee's leadership as CEO, the farm has grown to its present-day size of 8,500 cows, as well as 11,000 acres of cropland, which are used for growing feed and recycling nutrients. Brian Huyen, Homestead Dairy. Brian Huyen was born and raised on his family farm in Plymouth, Indiana. Faced with the challenge of staying competitive in the dairy industry, the Homestead Dairy Farm family decided to build automated calf feeders, a new robotic facility, and a methane digester to take advantage of new technologies and improve efficiencies. Please help me welcome our moderates and panelists. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you to our panelists for joining us here today. Excited for just kind of a free-flowing discussion. Hopefully we can bounce some ideas and thoughts off of each other and eventually open it up to all of you for questions that you might have as well. But we heard a little bit about all of you from kind of an introductory level perspective, and Brian, I'm going to throw a dart at you first here and just kind of keep the introductions going. I'm wondering if you can dive a little bit deeper than what we just heard in those introductory remarks about who you are, what your operation is like, and I'd like all of you just kind of focused on the biggest challenge that you all had to overcome over the course of the last year in piloting your operation. So, Brian, we'll start with you.
Last year, I'm Brian Huyen from Homestead Dairy. Thanks for having me. You totally thought I knew what I was going to talk about today until I participated yesterday, and pretty much everything I was going to say was brought up. So, excellent agenda yesterday. Over the last year or so, we built 4 auto feeder barns starting in 2015. That was done mainly by environmental pressure, or the laws in Indiana had changed. Before 2012, calf was considered a third of an animal unit. And after 2012, an animal was an animal unit regardless of size. So all of a sudden, where our calf hutches were, we were out of compliance with IDEM, or Indiana Department of Environmental Management, that we either had to collect all the rainwater off of the hutches, not allow the calf out of the hut, or put them in a barn. And so we did a lot of touring, of course, up here in Wisconsin. You guys are typically ahead of us in Indiana, and found some that worked, found some that didn't work. Talked with experts, but ended up building auto feeders and have loved them ever since. And then it'd always been a dream of mine coming back to the dairy. So I'm kind of 3rd and 4th generation at the farm to build a dairy from scratch. Our home dairy, as we call it, was pieced together over 30 years. So you got no 2 barns are the same shape or size. So creates its own challenges and inefficiencies getting those cows taken care of. And so, part of that, it was a dream of mine to build a dairy from scratch, to take advantage of efficiencies and new technologies. And again, lots of discussion on what to build, how to build it, what size, and we ended up building a 36 Lely Robots facility under one roof. Pretty much had to throw out everything I knew about managing cows over the last 15, 20 years, because it's different. And it was a good challenge to challenge how to manage cows in a robot dairy versus a conventional dairy. And actually, once we saw how it worked in the robot dairy, we ended up kind of merging the management in the conventional dairy so they were very similar. So, over the last year, we had, it was actually in 2020, we had quite a bit of mastitis issues. We bedded on manure fiber. And again, talking to some of you guys here in Wisconsin, we ended up putting in a dryer and struggled with that for about 1.5 years until we figured out we weren't getting enough heat. And got that fixed in January of 22. And so I can say 22 was a great year for us. And not only, milk price obviously helped, but our herd health was the best that I can remember. So.
Very good. Christina, a little bit more about your operation and the biggest challenge that you all faced in the last year.
Sure. We are located in northwest Iowa and southeast South Dakota. I personally live in Iowa, but my brother lives on a facility with 2 parlors in South Dakota. We manage our facilities and our herds together. Something we really faced in the last year was drought. I don't think we had rain for 3 months, and now we're getting hammered with snow. So maybe we prayed a little too hard. Not sure, but that was definitely one of our big struggles, just even in our best producing fields, just not having the forage that we were really hoping for, and also turnover in some management positions. We are really lucky to have Dordt University that has a good ag program really near to us, and we've gained a lot of managers out of that, but they're young and deciding what they want to do, so we lost a few of them to going back to their home farms or getting married and figuring out their life. So just really reassessing how we want to manage and who we want in some of those positions to help us accomplish our goals. Lastly, just convincing processors to keep building, because we would love to expand. I don't know if that's an issue here in Wisconsin, but we would love to see some more processors recruited out into the Midwest.
Very good. And Lee.
So a little bit about ourselves. We are a 5th generation dairy and crop farm located in northeast Wisconsin, up near Green Bay. Kind of a long, kind of cool history. My parents started the farm on property adjacent to our great-great-grandparents' farm. My dad was a World War II veteran, so didn't have the chance to take over the home farm, but located directly next to it. Kind of a typical story, started with 14 cows, 80 acres, and a very large family. So we had a lot of built-in labor, a lot of kids to feed, and a lot of kids to bring through college, etc. So the dairy grew pretty aggressively over the years. Really, the real growth spurt started with really what the rest of the industry did. So about 30 years ago, when I came on, things were really changing. We were milking about 150 cows at the time. Land availability in our neck of the woods was really tight. Land was really hard to come by. That's really changing. I think it's one of the things we'll talk about as we talk today about opportunities. But we've grown to the current size of about 8,500 milk cows. We're right around 11,000 acres. We're also heavily involved in a couple of other businesses. We have a depot, a calf depot at our farm that services dairies from across the upper Midwest, Wisconsin primarily, collecting and caring for babies for the first 3 to 7 days of their life. At that point, we are partners in a large heifer raising operation in eastern Colorado, heifer and calf raising operation. So at about 3 to 7 days of life, they leave the depot and they go to our partnership out in Colorado. When we talk about challenges this last year, I have a funny feeling everybody in this room will nod their head yes. I think really the biggest challenge has been supply side, really trying to get things done. Anybody who's trying to build anything, we've heard things we've never heard before. What do you mean there's no concrete? Just craziness out there. You go to buy a skid steer, you go to buy a tractor, you got to be thinking, not only 6 months in advance, but 1.5 years, 2 years. So that's been quite challenging.
Very good. Well, obviously, several things to follow up on from all of those comments, and I appreciate all of them. And we'll just kind of keep the conversation going then as we look. Obviously, the title of this panel was looking into the dairy industry within the next 10 years and thinking about the three of you and your respective operations, how you get to that 10-year mark and what your operations look like. I guess really the question is, do you expand beyond your current size? Do you become more efficient at your current size? But before we get to that, I do want to ask, and Lee, I'll start with you this time. What is the single most helpful piece of information you could have as you're making your future planning decisions for your operation? What do you most need to know right now as you're thinking about what the next 10 years of the industry will look like?
I think in my mind, the most crucial bit of information would be, what does our consumer want? Obviously, they are the ultimate voice. What is it that they desire? What do we have to deliver to that end? And boy, if a person had that bit of information, it would make all else really a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Christina, is that something you feel, or is there a different piece of information you would like about the next 10 years of the landscape?
I would like to know where the processors are going to build. We're definitely expansion-minded in our group right now, so I'd like to see that, and I'd like a crystal ball to see what environmental regulations are going to show up. We did build a digester at both of our facilities. One is complete and one is in the leak test phase, which you can't do in January in Iowa. So we are on hold for that. But yeah, just curious what's coming my way, because that could definitely change some of our future plans.
Mm-hmm. And we'll follow up on that later, I promise. But Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, other than what they talked about, the only other thing would be, okay, what's, the crystal ball on the markets? What do the markets look like in the next 10 years? We talk about, on a world stage, we're set up pretty good to continue to increase our exports, but, we saw what happened when Europe, let go of their quota system back in 14 or 15, what that did to the markets over the next 3 years. Is there another, big event like that could be coming in the next 10 years that we don't know about? And for us, it's our infrastructure. My home dairy, we've got barns that are pushing 40 years old, concrete that's 40 years old, and you're pushing a tire across that 3 times a day. How much concrete's left, and with supply chain, but not only that, but the inflation. When back in the early 2000s, you could afford, out of your cash flow to build a free, 300 stall freestall barn, and it was no big deal. Well, now, something like that, it's a huge investment, and for me, I've got partners as well, and we kind of all have different opinions on where we'd like the farm to go in 10 years. So that's going to be also a challenge to figure out, get everybody together and agree on the future direction of the business.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that, because you have a number of voices that are all very involved in the dairy industry, all invested in the success of your operation, but different ideas on how to get there. I'm not going to ask you to take a position on which one is the best at this point, but what are some of the ideas that you all are considering and have on the table at this point?
Obviously, doing another digester. So we've got a digester on one site. We will eventually get one on the other site. Just trying to wade through the different companies that are out there. There's a lot. And continuing to get to net zero, carbon neutral, I think is going to be consumer driven, but I think that's something that dairies are going to need to continue to look at. For us internally, it's, we've got, 2 of us that, handle the dairy side of the operation, love the cows, love that type of work. And I've got 2 partners that do the cropping side of the operation. They don't really care about the cows. So trying to weave through that and figure out, what, whether I can convince them to continue to invest in the dairy versus, well, let's just go buy farm ground and not worry about the dairy. So those are some of my internal things that I'll be dealing with. But yeah, projects, so we're also permitted to add another third onto the robot barn that we did. That permit will expire in 5 years, along with the digester. So 5 years is a long time, but the last 5 years have gone by really quick too. So we've got to make those decisions here relatively quickly. Just it takes so long to get anything done. Like you said, concrete's hard to find. Finding, in our area, finding a builder, an ag builder is extremely difficult. There's not a lot of dairy farms in my area. And we got to go a long ways to find somebody that has experience building an ag building.
Mm-hmm. Christine, I want to follow up on the environmental regulations comment that you made earlier, because for those that might not be familiar with AgriPulse, we're located in DC and Sacramento, and we follow very much the policy side of agriculture. The way I always explain it, we're not going to be the one to tell you the price of corn, soybeans, milk, etc., but we'll tell you what's going on behind the scenes for farm bill negotiations. That's more of our niche. And so when you mentioned regulations, my ears perked up, because I do wonder, as you're thinking about future plans for your operation, nobody has that regulatory crystal ball that you mentioned, but what does that level of uncertainty about what's going to be coming, either by way of legislation or regulation, what does that uncertainty do kind of in the back of your mind as you're thinking through those plans?
It does make us look at, say, our land base, because if we were to build, a lot of the regulations will likely deal with manure and how you handle that, so we have to make sure that we can properly dispose of it. I'm hopeful that the regulations that will come are not going to be as strict as what, say, Europe has done in some of their areas and kind of regulated some of their farmers almost out of business. I'm hopeful that we can be proactive and like you had mentioned, in a goal to get to net zero and to show our consumers what they want, that we can come up with some plans and work with the regulators rather than being regulated to the current size that we are at.
Mm-hmm. When you say work with the regulators, when you think and just think about the current regulatory structure that we have, be it state, federal, what have you, mm-hmm. How has the current regulation structure influenced your operation?
State-wise, we're in a very ag-friendly county, state. South Dakota, we ran into a few more permitting issues. With water, there's a big water line that supplies regionally a lot of water. So a little bit of that, but we personally have been kind of on the front side of adopting some of those things like the digesters and hoping to stay ahead of some of that and be able to show our co-ops, our processors, and ultimately our consumers that we do have goals to reach net zero and to care for the environment and our animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Lee, we can't have a conversation about dairy farmers, a conversation with dairy farmers about policy and not mention the concept of labor and making sure that you've got enough folks on the facility to do the work that you need to do on a daily basis. What do you need to see, be it from Washington, from the private sector, in terms of getting you the workers? What are your labor needs and desires at this point as you think of kind of at a 10-year scope?
When I look ahead, one of the challenges I see to the dairy industry, the dairy community, is, we're going to need a really sophisticated labor force moving forward. A lot of the things that my parents and grandparents, all of our grandparents and parents routinely did, fairly mundane, fairly repetitive. A lot of those things, technology, are likely to going to be, in my crystal ball, it looks like, I think a lot of those tasks are going to be put to the side, which is phenomenal. Hey, that allows you to move people up in the world. Anytime you're doing a manual task, you can only do it so many times, and you only add so much value to the world. The challenge that comes with that is we're really going to need some sophisticated personnel on these operations. I mean, we already have very sophisticated personnel. When I look at the science, when I look at the mathematics, when I look at the knowledge that goes into running a dairy on a daily basis, and I think about the curve, I mean, it's exciting yet scary about what's likely to happen over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. That to me is very challenging. You know, obviously right now there's a bit of an immediate need with foreign-based labor. You know, hey, everybody is screaming, not just agriculture, not just dairy. We are, as a whole in this nation, very short of employees, people willing to get the job done. We need those folks. We need to come up with some sort of a system that makes sense. Don't know what that some sort of a system is, but we've got to be able to be better than what we've done. You know, I think there's got to be some clarity. I think, you know, agriculture, I think a lot of the trade type businesses where we produce in the United States, we've got a decision to make. You know, are we going to import labor, or are we going to import food, or fill in the blank with whatever product it is that's being made where there's a worker shortage? So challenges, but yet at the same time, I think some real opportunities out there.
Mm-hmm. Lee, do you have the workforce you need to run your operation right now, or do you have gaps?
You know, we're sitting pretty good. We're not growing the dairy currently. We're working on some other projects, but you know, the side things, things like facility maintenance people, you know, very, very talented people, those kinds of positions, we're going to be adding those, and I'm sure it's going to be a scurry to go looking for those folks. There's just not that many of them out there.
Mm-hmm. Christina, Brian, are you all able to meet your labor needs at your operations, or do you have gaps of your own?
I had mentioned management, so we're going to lose a guy this summer. We're kind of looking for that. We could use a vet. We could we've taken advantage of the TN visa, which is 1 to 3 years, depending on who stamps their passport at the border. You can call your local legislatures and they can get that extended to the full 3 years. But we've had good experience with that. However, that's only for skilled labor, your calf care, your feeders, maternity, and we'd really love to see a way to get milkers here. I also find that with the TN visa, you know, okay, well, we apply for it and it takes anywhere from 3 to 9 months for it to happen. Then you bring in this guy and he is ahead of all the other guys that have been working for you, and it kind of upsets the apple cart a little bit. He may not fit. He didn't work for his position as some of the others did when they look at it as a hierarchy of time spent and work put in. So it's definitely a delicate balance. So I would love to see a way for us to get educated and unskilled labor. I don't care how it happens, but we're definitely going to need it sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Brian?
Yeah, so, you know, we've actually the last 6 months, it seems like we have to carry 1 or 2 guys extra just to make sure you're not short. So that's kind of frustrating when you're putting together a labor budget and all of a sudden you got to carry 2 extra guys. And so, yeah, we also use the TN visa program. And when we first started, it was a 2-month process. And now we had one vet that she went back to Mexico about 1.5 years ago because her father was sick. She said she's ready to come back, and now she can't get an appointment until September. So that's kind of frustrating that, you got to be thinking long term for your labor. And like you said, you know, we had the first couple of our guys came with several years of experience. Well, come to find out, they thought this was going to be their retirement job. And, you know, where they were leading reproduction programs in Mexico, now all of a sudden they're doing the day-to-day hands-on stuff. And, we've had, I mean, it's still a good program. We've got really good guys, but then there's some that basically, you know, I'm a vet and I'm not going to do that. You don't pay me enough to do that. And so it creates its own challenges. I really hope that, you know, of course we've been talking about this for at least 20 years. Hopefully sometime soon we can get something done in that labor front.
Well, Well, I tell you what, we've talked a lot about some of the challenges, some of the things that concern us. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about things that excite us, the opportunities in front of you all and your operations and the industry more broadly. And Christine, I'll start with you here, because when you look at things 10 years down the road, what is something, what just really fills you with excitement, be it a potential policy change, a potential technology introduced into the industry, a potential consumer outreach program, what have you? What is something that most excites you about what this industry might look like in 10 years?
Right now it's the export market. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for American dairy to be brought into Europe if they've made a little bit of increases in the last month or two, but realistically they've been down almost year over year. So that creates a gap in the market. New Zealand's also kind of said they've reached their top production. So wherever their exports are going, we can fill in. Developing countries, my favorite thing to share from Mary Ledman at Rabobank was that when a consumer puts dairy in their cart, they can finally afford it. If their status changes, it's not something they would choose to take out. They recognize how good it is for them and their family, whether it's the taste or the protein, nutrition value. It's definitely not the first thing they're going to cut. And with populations in India, Africa, South America, there's a lot of room for growth. I don't know that I see a ton of growth in the U.S. market, but U.S. dairy can definitely fill in a lot of gaps, and I'm excited to see that.
Mm-hmm. Lee, what has you excited?
Well, I am really bullish on dairy, agriculture in general, but dairy specifically. We are told the consumer cares about where their food comes from, which I hope is true. And we're in a unique situation as dairy farmers when we talk about things like regenerative agriculture, when we talk about things like carbon sequestration, net neutrality. Dairy is uniquely situated in that spot. What other business in the world, what other factory, I hate referring to a farm as a factory, but what other business can actually continually improve their factory? We have some really cool research coming our way as farmers, as dairymen. Regenerative ag is real, and I think it's really an opportunity. I think the other thing that I see is I'm just continually amazed at the youngsters entering agriculture. They are so sophisticated. They are at a plane of nutrition that it took me the better part of 25 years. I'm not sure I'm there with some of these kids that are coming along. They're phenomenal, and to me that speaks very, very well. We've got a great product. We've got a hungry world that wants to be fed sustainably. That to me is nothing but green lights for the dairy industry.
Mm-hmm. Brian?
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of Lee there. I'm real excited to see where the net zero, carbon neutral stuff goes. I think some of the talks we heard yesterday, we're getting closer. And I'm really excited to see what that technology is going to be, and really think within the next 10 years we'll get that nailed down, where it just adds to the story that we can help tell the consumer about how we care for their families, our families, the environment, the whole 9 yards. The other thing that was touched on a little bit yesterday was this AI, artificial intelligence. I had thought about it, but I didn't even kind of fathom the power that could have for us, in the future, where you don't necessarily have to rely on your employees to make these decisions. You can have the AI make that decision for you. It can give you, the dry cow list, or, this cow, she's sick. Okay, based on her current status and what other metrics you put in there, it will give you probably a better decision than sometimes you would make yourself. So that's pretty exciting to see. The biggest, I think, challenge for that is, and it's been the same I've been saying for probably the last 8 years, is we need to get this data all in one place. We've got 5 different software programs, collect, they all have their attributes that they collect or data they collect, and they've got their place in our business. But it would be so much simpler if I had all that information and data in one place, and for AI to work like we think it can, that's going to be a hurdle we're going to have to face.
Of course. I'm waiting for a enterprising person in the livestock industry to try and convince the rest of global technology to call it something other than AI. Because when you first mentioned AI, I thought that's, a lot of folks use that. I don't know if that's new technology, and then you explained yourself. Maybe we call it AINT. We'll have to get to that later. Folks, I've got a couple more questions of my own, but would encourage all of you to participate in the conversation as well. We do have a couple of microphones in the room. We've got a couple of folks that would be happy to run you one of those devices to ask a question. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone over to you. But I want to talk about, Brian, you were mentioning in your response there some of the new technologies, and I am continually amazed as someone who grew up on a farm but since has lived the last near decade in Washington, D.C., how different operations look now even than the ones that I grew up on, and just the continued change and evolution of technology, and how you all as producers will need to incorporate that. But I wonder, does it ever come a little too fast at you? Do you ever struggle to kind of keep up with the pace of innovation, to stay on the cutting edge of the technology that's available, but still not maybe overinvest and get to a point where you're spending too much on these innovations to keep yourselves profitable?
Yeah, there's definitely a line there. These innovations can be capital intense. Hugely capital intensive, and dairy margins, of course, 2022 the exception. Typically you only have so many dollars to invest at a particular given time, and trying to pick and choose. We've got a list, 4 or 5 deep of things we would like to invest in, and trying to pick which one at the right time to invest in. Of course, you got to figure, okay, which one's going to give us the biggest return, and then work your way down from there. But there's and a lot of this stuff is, if it's really new, is there any, in these contracts, is there any sort of protection for yourself if it were to fail? So those are, of course, things you got to weigh. The investment versus, they say it's going to do this, but is it really going to work the way they say it does? But at the same time, there's a lot of people out here that love being on the cutting edge, and it can be very high reward as well. Being if it does what it says, or you get it figured out that it's going to work the way you say it, or they say it does. It can be a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Christina, either of you have thoughts on just kind of managing your level of the level of innovation that comes into your operations?
At this point, we have a little bit of automation, robotics, mostly in the milking parlor, pre and post dip areas, but we haven't found much technology outside of that we have adopted and appreciated. Some of that, like you said, is early adopter. We tried a feed pushing robot, and my fairly handy husband, who gets called out to fix all the things, put a lot of time into this and really tried to make it work. But ultimately, when the owner's manual, user's manual was only in German, we really didn't make it very far. And we didn't have that support, so that one went back. We are interested in some of that and kind of keeping an eye on it, but depending on the cost of labor, the scale is not quite tipped for us to adopt some of those things. But that could very much change in the next 10 years with cost of labor going up and cost of automation going down. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I guess innovation, wow. It seems every day we're bombarded with something new at the farm gate, that the newest, greatest thing. And unfortunately, I'm very into innovation, so I like seeing new things. And try to do our research very thoroughly. I think I've also learned that as you adopt innovation, it does you no good unless you've got the right personnel to manage that innovation. But just some of the cool things coming down in manure management, some of the cool things coming down in animal care, out in the farm fields. I mean, I've just been amazed at where autonomy has gone. Just some incredible things that have been presented to us. I mean, hey, what do you mean you're going to turn a bunch of little single-row corn planters out there without a person anywhere near, and per row they're going to match the productivity of your regular corn planter? I mean, it's almost mind-blowing. You try to always control that enthusiasm because yes, they don't all work, but usually if you can pick and choose carefully, and especially if you got the proper person that's really vested in it, that seems to be the secret to making it work.
Well, you've entertained questions from somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about. Let's hear from some folks that do. I know we've got one over here, and then I think we've got one over there. My only request of our audience is, before you ask your question, give us name and location, and tell us just quickly about your role in the dairy industry.
Question for all three of you. I'm Tom Crave from Dodge County. We have a dairy farm and a cheese processing plant. All of you, Lee didn't, but I know he has a digester. The other two of you mentioned that you have or want to put in a digester. What is your goal by putting in a digester? What's the incentive for you or your farm, and what do you hope to get out of it?
Well, I mean, for us, the goal is to continue to work on our environmental stewardship. Of course, we want there to be an economic return, and that's kind of one of the challenges too. Is we're all entrepreneurs, and we invest in ourselves and our business, and it's hard. So our first digester, we did it ourselves. We invested our money, and it's hard to look at partnering just because we've always done things ourselves. And when you're looking at 15, 20-year contracts, and I've already got the facility that's 20 plus years old, do I really expect that facility to be functional the same way in another 15 to 20 years? Those are difficult decisions, but for us, it's continuing to improve our sustainability towards net zero.
I'll echo that. I know our processors, probably yours also, are kind of, they haven't said you have to, but they're really pushing to kind of claim some of these environmental goals and what we're doing to fix that. But like Brian said, it's, we're running a business and we need to be profitable. So there was some nice upfront dollars, which allowed us to invest in some expansion also. At one of our facilities, it was a bonus because it did improve our manure management plan. By putting in the digester, we also put in a sand separation system, and so that kind of was improving cow comfort and bacteria numbers by improving that system. But yeah, it's a fine line to decide to adopt that, and I know on the larger facilities we've been able to work with some of the digester companies, and the technology is not necessarily quite to the point where they can scale that down to some of the smaller facilities unless you can work with your neighbors. And again, like you said, is that going to be something that in 15 to 20 years we want to be doing?
Tom, I think what really attracted us to digesters was not necessarily the digester itself, but the technology that is coming, that is here off the back of those digesters. Digesters are very, very expensive. It's a whole, learning curve, and there's a lot of things to understand. But to me, what is really exciting about the digester, it pairs very well with some of the evaporative type technology out there where you can condense manure down, distill water, purify water, end up with a spreadable, very small product that is actually cost effective to locate far away from your land base if need be or if desired. So that's what really drew us to the installation of the digesters.
I think we've got another question back here.
Hi, I'm Erin Kennecke. I'm a crop insurance agent with Greenstone Farm Credit up in Lee's neck of the woods. I'm wondering, with the volatile commodity markets, not knowing if milk is going to be half the price in 8 months, or if corn and grain prices are going to be half the price, what are your strategies for managing risk and planning for growth in the future?
I guess I'll start. We have, last year because the dairy industry was so profitable, we ended up picking up another 400 or 500 acres of ground. We feel like if we can own it, that helps control some of that risk. We just opened a hedge account last summer, and we work with EverAg on both protecting the milk side and on the commodity side. It's fairly new. It's kind of a little difficult for me. It's hard enough managing a dairy, and then you got to make decisions or roll the dice on what the markets are going to do or what you think the markets are going to do. So that is a complete other realm of being a dairy business owner that I think it's going to be continuing to be more important to try to mitigate that risk by locking in, using options or whatever strategies you may have to control that. And so that's something I'm going to look at learning more about here in the next couple of years.
I'm a little jealous. Brian said he picked up 500 acres by us. Land hit $30K an acre as the highest sale in Iowa, and that's only 10 miles from my house. So buying land is probably not on our radar right now, but we do use both DRP and DMC, and those are great programs designed for all producers. I'm also blessed to have my sister on board with our dairy. She has a percentage stake, and she is a market analyst and does all our hedging. And also with a group of dairies is able to negotiate some feed contracts. This year with our inputs, because the crops were so bad in South Dakota, a lot of the corn that was meant to be ground and sold ended up as silage for us because they couldn't make anything off of it. So we did get what we needed at a discounted price, I guess, but probably not the way we would have chosen.
Yeah, and I guess I will echo some of those thoughts. Really big believer that vertical integration, hey, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Thus the cropping enterprise. How do you protect the cropping enterprise? That's actually fairly easy via crop insurance, those kinds of things. But really a big believer that helps us control what we can control, and really vertical integration all the way on through. Really like having control of the calf raising program, the heifer raising program, all on down the line. And then I guess we take that and we look at, okay, how do we market milk? We try to stay ahead of the markets and, forward sales, different contracting mechanisms, what have you. But then also, I think something that is probably on a lot of farmers' radars is, again, going back to that vertical integration. Can you take maybe a little more control? Commodities is a risky business. We all know that. And is there some opportunity there? I don't know. I suspect there is.
I think we've got time for one more, and I think, do we have a question over here? Do we have one over here? Looks like we do have a hand up over here.
Thank you. Jen Peel with BMO Bank out of Southeast Wisconsin. With labor challenges that are out there, a lot of folks are looking towards robotics as an alternative for labor. So I guess, Brian, this question is for you. You mentioned at the beginning that you had to completely change your thought process of management with putting the robots in. What were some of the major changes that you had to make in thought process with that?
So probably the most challenging thing is the foot bath. Where you put the foot bath, how do you manage cows going through the foot bath? That was probably the most, you wouldn't think that was that difficult, but that was probably the longest discussion we had, was how to do that. We ended up putting the foot baths at the end of the pens, and so when we're doing bedding, we're running cows through the foot bath at the same time. Works great. The one mistake we did make is the foot bath is a single lane, and so we can bed the pen in like 10 minutes, and it takes us 45 minutes to run 180 cows through a single lane foot bath. So if we were to do it again, we'd make sure that was a double lane. The other big thing on a robot dairy is was the Repro program. Instead of weekly shots, we're now doing everything on a daily basis. So yeah, all the the fresh checks, the preg checks, any program is done every day. I kind of liked it better because you don't have, okay, this day is loot day, and you're gonna have, I don't know, 400 or 500 cows to find and give loot to. Where this makes every day the same. You don't have these heavy days for, your off-sync days or, preg checks. And so we kind of then had merged that to the conventional side, where we're doing all that stuff on a daily basis. I think that helps a little bit with our flow into calving pens, where you don't have these real heavy days. It's kind of more uniform throughout the week. But the one thing we didn't do every day, so the only thing we're not doing every day in the robot barn would be foot trimming. That's being done twice a week, which makes our separation pins not big enough on those couple of days. And then I think dry off we're doing 3 to 4 times a week, not every day. That's probably the other big challenge in robots, is how do you dry off cows? You can't do it in the robot, and one of our early designs had kind of a false floor with a rail where you're kind of mimicking a parlor pit. Unfortunately, in the last design that we ended up building, that didn't get put in place, and so that is probably the least favorite task in the barn is drying off cows, because you either got to do it in a head chute or in a headlock, and that creates a challenge, especially when you're going to do 12, 15 cows a day. But other than that, doing all this stuff on a daily basis has worked really well, and we've kind of moved that type of management over into our conventional dairy.
Very good. Well, folks, it can be easy to talk about today, but it's a lot of fun to talk about tomorrow sometimes, isn't it? Really appreciated the opportunity to hear from all of you about your views on the next 10 years of this industry. Really appreciated the opportunity to learn from all of you. Folks, please join me in thanking our panelists.